Today is Veterans Day, and today we visit the story and revisit of Stanley Galaszewski, a Navy seaman killed on the U.S. California when Pearl Harbor was bombed in 1941.
Now we share the story of how Galaszewski finally has made it home.
When the Navy called me, I at first thought it was a hoax.
A stranger calling about a topic like this would make anyone think twice.
When someone calls you and says they're calling from the Navy, we've identified, you're not sure.
What Deborah Conti was sure about is that the story was very familiar.
So I was very close with my grandmother, who is Stanley's sister. She would share the story with me and my siblings about how he was lost during the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
He is Seaman Second Class Stanley Galaszewski, a 29-year-old Navy sailor stationed aboard the USS California on December 7, 1941.
I have a letter from September of 1941 to my grandmother from Stanley, from the ship, the USS California, that talks about how they didn't need to worry because he felt that they were safe in the middle of the Pacific. When the Navy called me, had some time to think about it, called them back, and really actually got emotional about it because this is what my grandmother wanted. She wanted to bring him home, and we're doing that for her.
Recipient of a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and more, Galaszewski was still never given the farewell he deserved. Finally, his descendants could say that day was coming. A full military escort awaited the hero's homecoming.
When we picked him up in Pittsburgh, we followed the hearse from Pittsburgh to Steubenville. We were escorted by the Patriot Guards, and it was a beautiful day. The Tuesday with coming from Pittsburgh was a beautiful day, and then the Patriot Guards took his remains out of the hearse and brought it into the funeral home.
From there, Galaszewski had one last journey.
And the streets were lined with elementary school children, middle school children, high school children, waving flags. I think the middle schoolers were actually all holding hands with their heads bowed in respect for the procession of Stanley's remains and all of our cars and all the motorcycles from the Patriot Guard.
Finally, Stanley was being laid to rest, an understandably emotional moment for the whole family.
All my children and my grandson, even my grandson, he's 4 years old, even he could tell that this was something to revere. He was soaking it all in. Stanley didn't have any children of his own, but he had 6 siblings. And one nephew who lives right outside Steubenville was in attendance. He's 74 years old, and he had actually provided DNA back in the early 2000s to help identify Stanley. So they did hand him the folded flag.
His final resting place couldn't be more fitting, right by his mom and dad.
Right behind my great-grandparents is where he's buried in a plot that was available. And it all felt so right.
While long overdue, the closure comes at a fitting time of year.
So yeah, it's touching, and I will have a more personal connection to Veterans Day going forward.